Have you ever felt?
Are you listening? Damn.
Both been here too long. You can't go back to Ireland or Poland or England, and I can't go back to Africa. And we will live here together, or we'll die here together. And it's not I am telling you. Time is telling you. You will listen or you will perish.
You ever felt?
Are you listening?
Subscribe. Hit the subscribe. Mash the subscribe. Hit the like. Make a comment. Send me a heart. In this video, I will delve a little deeper into MOVE, what were other leading factors in the May standoff, and my own thoughts on the subject. MOVE was started by Vincent Leaphart, who would eventually change his name to John Africa. His teachings included raw diet, natural hair, protesting the Vietnam War, anti-police brutality. He also taught against science, technology, and instead believed in and encouraged a nature-based philosophy. Even though his teachings embraced a more holistic lifestyle, the group was not without controversy. At some point, the group started to store large amounts of weapons that they would brandish in public. They were also known for making threats against public officials and aggravating their neighbors by hooking up loudspeakers and using them to broadcast their message. So what really started the May destruction? On August 8, 1978, residents of the very first MOVE house had been ordered by the police to leave the premises. Even though the group still had that day to leave, officers decided to enter the home, and that decision would end in a shootout that would take the life of one of the officers, Officer Ramp. The autopsy report showed that Ramp had been shot in the back, which meant he was not shot by any MOVE members as he was facing them. Now, one would think that since the evidence clearly exonerated them, they would not be found guilty at trial. A jury found them guilty in Ramp's death, and 9 members of the organization were sentenced to prison. Between August 8th and the trial, MOVE, the mayor's office, and the police department's hate would come to a head on a burning day in May 1985. But it gets worse. Now, I know that you would think the death of 11 people and 250 homeless would be as low as the situation could go, but it would get even more deplorable. Those burned in the blaze had been used without permission. Originally, the bones were given to the University of Penn for identification, and instead of returning them back to the family, Alan Mann decided to keep them and would continue to use them in his teaching curriculum when he took a job at Princeton. The remains would not stay with Mann. They would eventually make their way to Professor Janet Mung, who would showcase them in her Real Bones adventure in forensic anthropology class. She would continue to have them in her possession from 2016 to 2019. But whose bones were they? A common theory is that they belonged to a 14-year-old girl who had died in the fire at the MOVE house. John Africa Jr. was quoted as saying, "Nobody said you could do that, holding up their bones for the camera. That's not how we process our dead. This is beyond words. The anthropology professor is holding the bones of a 14-year-old girl whose mother is still alive and grieving." So, based on what I gathered, the bones were eventually returned back to Mann. Not a familial relative or even a surviving member of the movement. Make this make sense. Were the officers in the city found responsible for the death and destruction of 250 homeless? No. And 11 dead? No. But was one of the only people left alive arrested and charged with rioting and conspiracy? Yes. Ramona Africa was incarcerated for 7 years. So would it be wrong to think that this moment in history would be present in the minds of the majority of this country's residents? This is not taught. It is not discussed. Would this happen now? And if it did, would this be the response? We'll never know until it happens. And that's the problem. As long as we continue to look at violent acts committed against Black people as one-off incidents that are only spurred by a few bad apples, we will continue to excuse heinous crimes as just sad situations rather than what they are. These are the violent acts of people, cities, local and state governments, as well as federal government, who will continue to see Black people and minorities as less than and disposable. And this is what this whole fight is about. It isn't just about one incident or several current incidents. It's about a country and a large portion of its citizens' inability to value the lives of those they deem outside of themselves. They consider those lives to not be worthy. So what do? Do we just forget incidents like Move? Do we call this country to the carpet for what it has done and continues to do? Or do we move on like they say? No, you can't move on. PTSD doesn't allow you to move on. Transgenerational trauma doesn't allow you to move on. Intergenerational trauma doesn't allow you to move on. Negating and ignoring things like reparations and even the acknowledgement of the fact that this country is wealthy because of its slaves doesn't allow for us to move on. So all of these things that I talk about will consistently come back to one topic and one topic only. This country's inability to take responsibility for what it did and what it continues to do. So that's why this fight is not for some of us. This fight is for all of us. Thanks.